myself a Lincoln. Got me plotting, got me plotting, got me thinking, got me thinking. How can I come up and get myself a Lincoln out of Continental?
Hey, this is Tony Boss Bolin coming to you from the Lincoln Addict Podcast.
Hey, it's Jason ODB, the Lincoln Addict, and here back with episode 15. Thanks for everyone that's continued to tune in, and want to remind everyone that this podcast is brought to you by a few of the fine folks out there and companies, including Devious Customs. You can visit Devious Customs, just how it sounds.com, and order on their website, whether you're looking for custom suspension components or other items. Jeff and team continue to expand their lineup. They even have some dash pieces for the 64, 65 Lincolns. They even have window switch upgrades for certain year cars. So let's say you buy a car, all the switches are bad. You're going to have to end up sending those in typically to get rebuilt if you want to just go with a modern type switch and potentially save some money depending on your situation. Just visit deviouscustoms.com. Oh, by the way, the website's been recently refreshed. Great user interface, super simple. Also, Colorado Custom Wheels. Visit coloradocustom.com and check out the Lincoln replica wheels that they produce. They make them in pretty much any size that you want, and they specifically look like the original hubcaps. The great news is, as many of you know, the original Lincoln hubcaps were really set up to work with the bias ply tire. So when you run a radial, many of you will end up with lost hubcaps, and especially if you get them polished, they look cool, but they go flying off. Trust me, I know. I recently lost one that was polished. So go to coloradocustom.com. You can look them up on Instagram as well, the Colorado Custom, and Michael and team will take care of you. Last, but certainly not least, steel rubber. If you're into these 60 Lincolns or many other hot rods, you know the name Steel Rubber. Visit steelrubber.com. You can scroll down and select the year, make, and model of your vehicle, and they will mail out for free an individual catalog, if you will, that literally will give you everything you need to know about those pieces that you need for your car. I always suggest make a little spreadsheet in Excel or Google Sheets, and then that way you can have a column for your part number, your price, and specifics that you want to add there, and then chip away at the list. Order when you can. If possible, order everything at once. That way you have it, and you can just start replacing it at your leisure. They also have a lot of videos, I think, on their YouTube channel on how to do these type of installs. So Steel Rubber Products, it's steelrubber.com. Okay, so again, did not make you guys wait too much longer. Already plugging away on episode 16. But thanks again for everybody that came back, continues to listen. Also, check out our YouTube channel. I did just upload, I had 3 videos that I made some months ago, and really had wanted to stitch those together, and just, haven't had the time to do some of the video work I was doing for a while. I kind of ended up changing careers and, just got super busy with work. I mean, it doesn't leave a lot of time. Same thing with many of you. We're just, kind of get up every day, go to work, do the family thing, all of that. So carving out time is, not the easiest thing as you get older, as many of you know. So again, thanks for always listening here and checking out our YouTube channel. You can spread the word if you're on an Apple device, as many of you are. You can hit the share button, or typically it's like the triple dots, and then once you share it, you can text that to a friend, maybe a friend, family member that are into these cars, or maybe a buddy that's looking at buying one. By all means, share it, and the more you share, the more we're going to grow. And then, of course, if you're on an Apple device, go to the podcast app. It's that pre-installed app. Tap on Library, select Lincoln Addict, and then scroll all the way down. It's not too far to scroll because, we're only on episode 15. You're going to scroll down, and then you can rate, hopefully a 5-star rating. It'll say submitted, thanks for the feedback, and then you can even tap right there on write a review. And you can go ahead and write a review, and then what I'll start doing here on the next episode is any reviews that we've had up until this point, I'll go through and read those. If you leave one and you want your name or Instagram account there and, a little shout out, by all means, I'll definitely do that. So check that out. and spend a little bit of time if you can do that. Much appreciated. All right. So kind of the recap of episode 14, which I always like to do, is we had my friend, my ratty friend, Rusty Wall from the Ratties. And the Ratties is just kind of, if you listened, he explained it. It's just a group of friends that get together. And, they arguably have the biggest kind of cruises and hangouts, kind of unofficial. Then they kind of do some of the official stuff that he was talking about. But got to tip the cap to our friends over at The Ratties. You can follow them on Instagram. It's just the RATTYS, as we mentioned. So go out there and do that. If you want merchandise, send them a direct message. They also have that closed, non-public group on Facebook. And I think last I checked, it's about nearing 400 of us Ratties in there. So we like to talk about cars, of course, Lincolns, and all kinds of cool stuff. Now, in this episode, you saw more than likely the cover art, which I kind of put that together for each episode. And there's a guy named Frank. So I don't want to give away his whole story, but the title of this episode ties into his Instagram name. Some of you are probably following him just because, if you're on Instagram and you like Lincolns and boom, you're probably going to be following some of those kind of key guys that post stuff, right? Content that you like. And if you're not, once you listen to his interview, highly suggest you go out there and follow him. He's a great guy. He's up in Canada. Again, don't want to give away all of his story. We'll let him do that. Now, on this episode, I'll also kind of just cover the normal stuff. Of course, what I call Lincoln Life updates, cars, any cars or parts for sale, Lincoln's in the movies, and then any Project Smuggler's Blues updates, which I do have a couple. And then we'll give a shout out here just for a random individual or maybe a shop or a company. So Lincoln Life updates, really, I didn't save a lot here. Typically on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, I'll see stuff throughout the weeks or months, as we've kind of come to realize lately. And really, that's that. There's just not a lot that caught my eye, I should say. One thing that I continue to see is just more stories about the Lincoln Continental. And what's kind of amazed me is, always on eBay, always on Facebook Marketplace, just looking at stuff. And I've seen like the recent models just, it's crazy how much cars depreciate. And, I've seen like the 2017 models that you can get, for the 20 to 30,000 range with a lot of features, if not maxed out. And there's also a couple of companies, I think one I want to say it's in Las Vegas somewhere, where they'll take a totaled car or one that's been in a bad accident, and they'll bring that thing back to literally looks brand new as far as, all the footage they show and things like that. And I always thought that was cool because oftentimes when one of these cars comes out and it's 70, 80, dare I say $100,000, depending, a lot of us are going to go, well, I'm not going to, I can't afford that car, or I don't want to spend that kind of money on a vehicle and that type of thing. And then before you know it, 3-4 years goes by and that car is affordable. Very similar. I remember when I was a lot younger, there was a car that had came out. It was like a 2000 model, and it was a new model car, and I liked the body style, and I was just like, I wasn't in a position to go spend that much for a car. And then several years went by and they depreciated enough, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to get one now. And it didn't have that many miles. So I always thought that was an interesting spin. But the Continental, I swear every time I had looked, there was a story up until this year that they're going away, then they're not, they're going away, then they're not. But the last I had heard, according to the Detroit News website, this is going back to July, it said Ford to end production of the Lincoln Continental at the end of 2020. So, they had a call for these cars to be brought back. Many of us were like, man, bring it back. And then, they brought it back, and was it a nice car? Absolutely. And what I thought was, like, many of us were like, God, why wouldn't you have maybe done the rear doors, right? The suicide doors. And then I think they had gotten so much flack for that they ultimately, of course, as we all know, they went ahead and did the special edition one, and they were so limited in production. It kind of goes back to my point a few minutes ago where it's like, okay, you got to kind of be a certain kind of person that's going to be able to go out and pre-order one of those. And, even if you ended up getting one, it goes back to the same conversation or message I just had. It's like, okay, maybe those hold their value to a certain extent because, okay, it's the Continental, it's extended, it's all through, Ford, Lincoln, through their people, that shop that they teamed up with or that company, so it had that mystique to it. But if the regular ones are depreciating that much, I just can't see any average person that's going to go out and buy one and hope that it's going to, obviously maintain its dollar amount and or go up. So, do I think in 50 years, I mean, those cars, it's going to be cool to have one, absolutely. But I just don't see the average guy or Lincoln fan going out and running to get one. Now, if they would have all had the suicide doors, and I knew that I think we all knew they were never going to do this. I mean, if they somehow were able to come out with a convertible that wasn't just limited to 100, I think it would have been like when Chrysler brought back the 300. When that came back, many of you know, I mean, that car was, everybody seemed to want it. It just had the styling of a luxury style car. We had rented one back in, we drove up to the Pittsburgh area for my brother-in-law's wedding. And my son, I want to say it was June of 2006, because my son was just an infant. And, I didn't want to fly up there, so we ended up driving. We rented a 300, and it was maxed out, all the features, leather. And I remember just what a nice car it was. And I was like, man, this is really nice. I could see why people want one, and that type of thing. But going back to the Lincolns and the Continentals, it's like now with Ford focusing more on either the electric side or the trucks, SUVs, because that's what people are buying. It just, in hindsight, almost seems like, why did they bring it back at that time? So I think there's going to be more and more that will eventually pop up for a good price. People will end up getting those and then maybe customizing them. I haven't personally seen one that's been like on air suspension or anything like that. And, so I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to, kind of pan out. I know the numbers, they were, ironically enough, they weren't super high production numbers, just like the 60s Lincoln. So I'll kind of be curious. Maybe on the next episode, I'll go back and research and kind of see what some of those production numbers were over the past like 3 years or so, and then kind of compare those. If you've ever bought anything from John Cashman, and by the way, John is the man when it comes to the Lincoln tops. You can go on convertiblelincolns.com. That's with an S, convertiblelincolns.com. And, you'll see the products that he offers. He's also great about answering your questions over the phone. And then if he's got a product that he can sell to fix your problem, by all means, he'll make sure he gets that to you. But he is gracious for sometimes giving you copies of certain kind of pieces of paperwork and things like that. And one of the things that he had sent out to me years ago was the production numbers, from 61 through, it was either 68 or 69, and it kind of showed this how many sedans, convertibles, and then of course the coupes, how many of those were produced each year, and the numbers are just, to me, it's just crazy how low they were. And we often would talk about, John and I had a couple conversations, and I've talked about this with Blair and some of my friends as well, that some people, they seem to think like, well, I wonder how many of these are left, and I wish we kind of knew. It's kind of cool with the Suicide Slabs and the Raddies and Lincoln Life guys, and I know there's the Suicide Kings Los Angeles, and there's Lincoln Addict, and there's a few other Lincoln groups out there. I'm probably forgetting a couple. I'm trying to think, but with all of these groups, I think there's a guy in the Suicide Slabs that had put together a spreadsheet of, tracking some of the cars and the VIN numbers and stuff, but I don't know how many are really still out there, so that'll be interesting if someone can kind of nail that down at some point. But, with the convertibles, with only 3,000 some odd made a couple of those years, and, let's say 50% only maybe survive these 50 years, then that puts the number between like 1,500 and 2,000. So, if you've got one of the convertibles or even the sedans or the coupes, the coupes are on the rise from 66 to 68, those awesome coupes, then obviously that there's not a lot of them out there. So take care of them, right? All right, so that's really all I had for kind of the Lincoln Life updates. Again, not a lot. I'll come up with more for the next one. Now, the Lincoln Continental broker updates. So I, in the last couple of years, have kind of got into trying to help sellers move these cars to a buyer that maybe either wants it for an investment or wants to just get out there and enjoy it like many of us do. So I mentioned that Dr. Nicholas, he has 2 sedans that he's selling. So it took me a little extra time than I thought, but we finally got the information. And basically, he's got a 66 gold, I'll call it, sedan, and then he has a 63 blue. Both of these cars have a lot of money put into them. And as an example, the 66, the motor was rebuilt, and it has a full-blown, brand-new, all-interior, everything. So just the motor rebuild in the interior could be pushing, and we've got the receipts for everything. The last seller provided all of that. And, that might be 10, 12, 13 grand just in those 2. I mean, literally going through, paying retail to get the motor redone, all painted, detailed, and then reinstalled. A lot of work. So that, and then the 63, we kind of have a potential deal that's going down on it. So on that one, beautiful blue car. Love the interior. Really rock solid on both of these cars. He's basically asking $25,000 on each. Now, I know some folks will go, oh, well, 25 grand for a sedan. Listen, I've said it before. You can sometimes get a decent sedan for a lot less. We've seen, people pick a sedan up maybe for 8 grand. But typically, these cars are going to need everything. And you might go, well, plugs and points and a couple things here and there. I mean, it adds up. When you start talking about, okay, your exhaust manifolds, maybe those gaskets need to be redone. So it's like, okay, well, you could pay someone like Blair Farmer. He'll put it up on the lift and he'll change the gaskets. Well, changing the gaskets, and then maybe you realize, like he did on one of his recent customer cars, the manifold or the head, the ear of it was cracked. So where it bolts to the manifold, and that's one of the weakest part of these cars. So then it's like, okay, well, now I need to get another head for it. A lot of times the manifolds, from all that heat, you can't reuse them or the bolts break, so you end up going, well, man, I can get another set of manifolds for, I don't know, $500. Exhaust needs to be redone, full brakes, either wheel cylinders, fuel system has to be gone through, obviously plugs, points, wires. You start to go, well, man, the radiator's never been pulled. So all of that stuff starts to add up, and that's what happened on my 64. It was like, really, in hindsight, I probably could have not, maybe didn't have to pull the motor. But, when you start getting down to it and you have so much ripped out, it starts adding up. So to be able to get a car that pretty much already has all the hard work done, it's already got the price of the car itself built in, you've already got all the labor and the parts and the expenses of getting up to literally a turnkey car. The previous owner of, like, for instance, the 63, he would turn the key on that thing, and when he would drive to where he had to go to, he's a tour bus driver, he would drive 50 miles each way. Not one issue. There, park it, do the tour bus stuff, come back, crank it up, drive it home. It's just one of those really nice cars. So if you've got the funds and you're looking for a nice, really, really nice car that you can even build upon and make it your own, start with a great foundation. Boom, here you go. You got Dr. Nicholas. So you can reach out to me. Easiest way is probably going to be Lincoln Addict Podcast at gmail.com. That's the one I check the most. You can also send a direct message on Instagram. I'm at Lincoln Addict or Lincoln Continental Sales. Lincoln Continental Sales, that is the main page that I post on. And then those cars that are for sale, they will batch over to the Lincoln Addict Facebook. So I know that's a lot, but the reason why I do that is, I don't want to have like 10 different pages. I already have a lot. But with the Lincoln stuff, what I can do is the Lincoln Continental stuff, that'll go over to Facebook from Instagram, and that'll go over to the Lincoln Addict page, if you will. So if you're following our page on Facebook, that's good. You can also follow us, again, as I mentioned, with those 2 different accounts on Instagram. So go out there. A lot of people are always looking for one of these cars, and they ask a lot of questions on what should I look for. You can go back and listen to those other podcasts. I'll spend some more time in the future also talking about key things. But just know when someone has already spent the money and went through all that stuff, it's kind of like, look, you buy a brand new car, it depreciates. Well, in the reverse here, you've got someone that puts a lot of time and money into the cars, and then they realize maybe they want to do something different with their time or money. They sell the car, and then you're able to acquire it at a very fair price with everything done. So that's kind of the point here of these two sedans. Really nice. More photos coming on Instagram or Facebook. Just follow Lincoln Addict or Lincoln Continental Sales. Okay, next, Lincolns in the movies. I'm a huge movie fan, primarily love 80s, 90s movies, primarily 80s, but as I've gotten older, I've, just really love the fact that it's so easy to watch a movie now, right? With Netflix, Amazon Prime, if you buy stuff on Apple, whatever. And one cool thing that I just love, even about old TV shows, like for instance, watching Chips and things like that, you spot so many different cars, and it kind of dates that time and that movie and that period, if you will. And if you follow me on Instagram at Lincoln Addict, you'll see that I put together a couple of clips that were longer ones that kind of go over to the Instagram TV. So that's all built into Instagram, but the Instagram TV just allows you to post content more than 1 minute. So I put together a couple that talked about some of the older James Bond movies, like Goldfinger and things like that. So I've always enjoyed, like I said, getting older, watching some of the movies, and especially of the 80s and 90s, like picking out like, oh, there's such and such car. And there's a whole community of people that do this, and they do it for fun. But the movie I wanted to highlight here, which is kind of funny, is Inspector Gadget. So the 1999 film, Inspector Gadget, this features, believe it or not, a Lincoln Continental convertible. And one of the reasons why I wanted to mention this is when I was over at Blair's shop not too long ago, I don't know, maybe a month ago, I was talking to Chris Dunn. I had walked over to Lincoln Land Inc. And I was talking to Chris for a minute, and I said something about, Inspector Gadget or a parts car or something. And he was talking about parts, and he goes, yeah, I got some parts off that car. And I was like, oh, really? And what was so ironic about it is, if you've never seen the movie and you're a Lincoln guy, you're probably going to be like, damn, it's kind of frustrating because you see this classic car, already established earlier. The numbers aren't super high on these, but like with anything, you see this car and you're like, man, why did they do that? Why would they even, use a nice car like this? We're thinking, man, you should have saved it, whatever. But they, regardless, it was probably like a parts car, or something that, wasn't a super nice car, and they just threw together as a quote movie car. But the most kind of thing that stands out to me is the grill on it. I'm pretty certain it's a 64. I know it has a 64 bumper on it, and it almost looks like it has either a 65 deck lid or the trim piece is taken off. Again, it's definitely hodgepodge together. I know it has I think an Ohio license plate on it in the movie. And the grill, like I said, is a 62. It's a convertible, and it looks like a 64 body from what I can tell. So interesting. If you've never seen the movie, I don't want to say go watch it because you might kind of cringe, but it's out there. So if you Google Inspector Gadget, Lincoln Continental, it will pop up. It was a white car, and Chris Dunn actually has a few parts from it. So a lot of times these movie cars, again, are kind of hodgepodge together, so I'd be kind of curious to find out more information on it. I know it's missing the trim pieces in the bumper. That's something that stuck out to me when I was watching it. All right, last couple things. Project Smuggler's Blues, so I got a lot of updates here. It definitely was a good day this weekend, as Ice Cube said in his famous song. And I went to Blair's shop, really with a goal in mind to focus on just a few key things. Blair often tells me it's one thing at a time on these Lincolns. You can't overwhelm yourself. It's like, hey, focus on one thing and try to resolve that one issue or that thing. So the goal was to figure out why the gauges were not working. I originally thought, hey, maybe the IVR is bad, which is a common diagnosis in these Lincolns, whether you're like on the Lincoln forum or just some of the Ford groups or some of the Facebook groups for Lincolns. Typically, you've got, at least in 64, 65, you have like 4 main gauges, and then you have your speedometer. So in my case, I pretty much, when I got the car, none of them, for the most part, were working. Well, a couple of them were, kind of. So what ended up happening was my temp gauge, the last time I was at Blair Farmer's shop in Clearwater, we came to the realization that the temp gauge just is off. It needs to be adjusted. And that dated back to when I even first got the car, because when I first got the car and I drove it a little bit, thought it was overheating. Well, of course, using the temp gun, as I mentioned, I think on the last episode, realized that the car isn't overheating. The fan is cycling. It's doing its thing. The radiator's working. It's got the coolant. All that stuff is good. Well, the fuel gauge has never worked, okay? The low warning indicator has always worked and continues to work, but the gauge itself never worked, right? So I kind of was like, all right, I had the speedometer working. It bounces a little bit, but it works. And the temp gauge kind of works, right? It moves. The amp gauge I bypassed. I've talked about that in the past. And then on the 2 on the left, you have, of course, the fuel, and then you have the oil pressure. Well, the oil pressure stopped working on July 31st. And that I was driving to a local car show, pulled out of the gas station. Boom, looked like I had no fuel pressure. Or, oil pressure. So I knew, with the motor being rebuilt and all that stuff, that, okay, I know, I have a new oil pump rod. It's checked the fluids. I knew everything was fine. So it kind of led me to believe, and a few people were like, well, man, your IVR is probably bad. So upon getting to Blair's, I had reminded him that the temp gauge was still kind of working, and that pretty much ruled out that the IVR was bad, because the IVR feeds the fuel gauge, the oil pressure, and the temp gauge. So that's a little module, and it pulsates. He explained it to me. It pulsates like, 4 or 5 volts or something like that to the gauges. And if that stops working, you could just Google Ford IVR. You'll see what I'm talking about. If that stops working, then your gauges are not going to work. So I know Pat Tien up in Canada, he kind of has a cool new school type replacement for an IVR. So he's got a video out there on his YouTube channel. And I know that he's got a pretty cool thing going. And I kind of was like, well, should I go that route? You can buy this little piece for $1. And he talks about it on his channel, and you can replace your IVR. Well, the IVR itself, depending on where you go to, you're going to spend $25 to $50, $60 to get another replacement. So immediately Blair was like, well, now that you reminded me that your temp gauge is working, he's like, we pretty much know the IVR is working because it's feeding power to it. So he's like, well, let's start here. So what we ended up doing was we started at the oil pressure sender. Now, I recently put a brand new sending unit on the oil filter housing, right? So it screws in there. And I had a little bit of a fiasco doing that because I should have never put the original one back on when the motor was on the stand. And I did. I was like, oh, I'll change it later. And the thing was pretty much, I put it in there a little too hard, right? A little too far. And it just was a pain to get out because it wanted to kind of strip, the housing of it where you put the wrench. It was kind of stripped and you just couldn't get a good bite on it. So I had to take off the oil filter housing to change it. So I did all that, a couple months ago. So I'm thinking I got a brand new sending unit. And Blair reminded me, he said, look, just because it's brand new doesn't mean it's going to work. So with a light tester, we tested, and sure enough, it was blinking at the pigtail over by the oil pressure sending unit. What that means is it's getting a signal. So we went ahead and went to the parts store, spent $12 and change, and boom, got another sending unit, put it on there. Lo and behold, boom, I got oil pressure gauge working. So I'm like, great, It's kind of scary, even though you've got oil pressure, when you're driving down the street and you see you have, according to the gauge, no pressure. So kind of scary, but got that fixed. So the next up was, I'm thinking, we're kind of done for the day. I had kind of a hard stop. I was going to go and do some stuff. And Blair said, well, look, go ahead and jack up the rear of the car and take out the sending unit for the fuel. Now, I've installed it and I've removed it before. It's not too difficult. You obviously need to have a good jack to jack the car up, and then you also have to have, I highly recommend don't do anything under a car. Even if you're like, it's fine, don't do anything under a car without jack stands, okay? So basically, jacked up the car, got on the creepy crawler, went up underneath the back of it, super easy to get in there, have a little bit of a light. You take off 2 fuel hoses, and you unplug the plug. You get a hammer and a flathead. You tap on the ring, I call it. Obviously, left to loose, right? And once that ring comes off, you can very carefully, takes a minute, you got to pull the sending unit out and kind of finagle a little bit and be very careful towards the end. And then you got the float. You'll kind of move it a little bit up in there, and you'll be able to just, boom, take it all out. So immediately gave that to TC. TC gave it to Blair. Blair had it over on his bench. And not 5 minutes later, he goes, sending unit's bad. What was ironic is I never really drove the car with the original fuel tank and sending unit because we just knew this thing had been sitting, and we could tell it's probably going to be nasty. So we basically, when I first got the car, we ended up putting a different fuel tank in it that was clean, that was resealed, and we put a brand new sending unit in it. The fuel gauge never worked from that point on. So I have never owned this car with a working fuel gauge, okay? So let's just lay that foundation. What that meant was I put in a brand new sending unit and it never even worked, right, as far as the gauge itself. So what Blair was able to do is, you can probably Google this and see on YouTube a video on how to check, and basically he can kind of see just by moving the float, does it do anything? And it wasn't. So he said, hey, Jay, do you want me to take it apart? I can probably fix it, but I have to see, and of course, many of you have seen a sending unit. It's not, it's not like this big thing. It's like, okay, well, there's a few little things you got to do to take it apart for those that know how to do it. So he takes it apart and he was able to fix it. And it wasn't there was a bad connection, is from my understanding on it. So, long story short, had it plugged in, you can move the float, and then boom, you see the meter changing as you move it, right? So, went ahead and reinstalled that. Now, I would tell anyone, if you reinstall one, and let's say, like on mine, for instance, I had changed it just, I don't know, a couple years ago, right, we'll say. So I had a fresh rubber gasket in there. And the gasket, the newer style ones are flat and they're round. And I don't know if they're even a 1/4 inch as far as kind of the not the thickness, but just how wide it is in there. So I could tell that was still, like, I had put like a little bit of sealant around it so it'd sit in there. And that was staying in there really nice. So I could kind of tell, hey, I'm not going to have to change that right now. But if you had never changed yours, or maybe your sending unit is super old and you intend to replace it with another one, you're going to go to Lincoln Land Inc. and buy one, just use the new seal that comes with it. It is a little bit different. I think the original ones were more of a round seal in terms of, I kind of call it like a rope style seal. But regardless, use the new gasket if you can. So mine was still good. I went ahead and put it in there. And then we still were having kind of an issue where it was like, all right, well, we knew that it was working now, but when he would use some of his instruments and try to get the gauge itself to move using an ohm meter and things like that, it wasn't doing anything. So ended up, I've had the dash apart still for a while, that main bezel. And what we ended up doing was we took out the 2 gauges on the left. They come out together. That's your fuel and your oil pressure. So went ahead and took those out, and we ended up swapping some parts, right, from a parts car, if you will. Swapped some parts out, and what we found was he had to use other instruments to basically, he could get the gauge to work from the ohm meter. So the gauge itself would go all the way to fuel very slowly, all the way to full. Then he would disconnect it and would slowly go all the way back to empty. So what he ended up doing was he spent about, upwards to an hour adjusting it, to the point now it's working. So the good news is I think for the most part it's working fine. I do think it's going to need maybe a little bit of an adjustment on the low side. I'm anxious to put more fuel in it. Yesterday I had put in about 10 gallons of non-ethanol fuel, which I suggest. Put non-ethanol fuel in. Obviously drove about 32, 33, 34 miles from here to there. So 10 miles a gallon, probably burned, I don't know, 3.5 gallons of fuel. So I was probably down to like a quarter tank, and it looked like on the way home that I was even lower, even though the low warning indicator, the little light on 6465, that had not come on. So bottom line, you can, if you go to someone that's experienced, they can take and they can get these gauges working, and then you're not throwing money out at something, whether it be an IVR or other things that you think that might just magically fix your issue. In mine, it pretty much was fuel gauge wasn't working because of the sending unit, which he fixed. Then the gauge, even though the sending unit was now fixed, the gauge was still not calibrated, so that took him a while to do that. We fixed the oil pressure piece because of, who would have thunk it, a couple months ago, put a brand new sender in, boom, still not working. So went ahead and changed that, got that fixed. The amp gauge, I've talked about this before, I bypassed it, so that doesn't work. And then the temperature gauge, I do think is going to need a little bit of an adjustment. It still hasn't, I don't think it's perfect. I know it's not perfect, but it really, when I come to a stop, it really, really creeps up. Whereas when we use the temperature gun, we know the car's not getting as hot as what the gauge is indicating. So all that being said, it was a great day. It was awesome to be able to kind of learn some things, wrench on the car a little bit. Blair Farmer is great at what he does. Teresa, TC, she is awesome as well. So both of them helped a ton. And, super excited that, again, can kind of drive the car. And those are a couple more things that are now working as they should be. But with everything, they're Lincolns, and we'll have to just kind of see if we can maintain those working items. So that's a lot to say. Bottom line is you can get your original gauges working with a little bit of time and effort. That would potentially save you money versus going with an aftermarket gauge like a Dakota Digital. Those are going to run you, depending on the vendor. You can buy them from Devious Customs. They're around $800. And then, of course, you got potential shipping and whatnot. So that's going to obviously involve a little bit different look in the car. It's going to involve a little bit more modification to get the gauges, the seat in there correctly for 6465. So it's got a little bit of an effort tied to it, whereas I was like, well, look, I'm not ruling out going with those. I loved Dakota Digital, great company, great products, but if I can get my originals working, I'm all for it. So that's where we stand. More updates to come on Project Smuggler's Blues in the LincolnForum.net, my build thread, as well as on the next episode of the podcast. Okay, so next, just really I want to give a huge shout out to John Long of Nashville. John, Jon Long, Nashville, all together on Instagram is his username. He's actually selling his beautiful home up in that area as well, up in the Tennessee area. It's Spring Hill, Tennessee. For sale log cabin on almost 11 acres. Looks just freaking awesome. John was the previous owner of the two sedans that we're trying to sell for the doctor, and he's done a great job reinforcing to me some of the paperwork that he included with those cars, and hopefully whoever ends up buying them from the doctor, they will enjoy those cars as much as he did. And John, you can even reach out to him. He's done great answering some questions for some potential buyers of these awesome sedans. So go out there. And then Clint Sides, he performed all the work on these cars. His Instagram is Clint, CLINT, Side, SIDE, _Snoopy. And Clint has done a lot of stuff for the Lincoln community. So big ups to him. And big ups to John Long for helping kind of reinforce to those new potential buyers, as I mentioned, how awesome those two sedans are. All right, so before we do the intro to Frank's audio, I want to remind everyone that Devious Customs if you're listening this Labor Day weekend, he has an awesome sale going on, 61 through 69 Lincoln airbag kits. You can save $200. You have to go to DeviousCustoms.com. He also has a buy a set of control arms and get a free tapered ball joint upgrade. So you can save some money there. So get out there, DeviousCustoms.com, if you're looking to customize your Lincoln. And again, he also has some other parts that would basically bring your car up to a new modern appeal, if you will, depending on speaker pods or the glass for the dashes in 64, 65, so on and so forth. Thank you again to Colorado Custom. Love what they continue to do for the Lincoln community with those awesome Colorado Custom wheels. You can go out there on their Instagram and you can look, and they have a hashtag specific for a lot of their Lincoln wheels, and it's Lincoln CC Cycle wheels. If you tap on that, you're going to see there's over 100 posts, and it's pretty awesome to see those wheels. They look just like the original hubcaps. And then last but not least, steel rubber, the best in the business. Love steel rubber. I'll be doing some videos, hopefully before we get too much further into the year, showcasing how easy it is to install these awesome products. It's steel, STEELE rubber.com. All right, with that being said, we're going to roll into Frank's audio. Frank is a great guy, down-the-earth dude, family guy, and really always enjoy seeing his photos on Instagram. So make sure you go out there and follow him once he mentions his Instagram account. You guys enjoy the long Labor Day weekend if you're listening now. If you're on the road or whatever you're doing, be safe. And thank you for always tuning in to Lincoln Addict Podcast. If you want to buy a sticker, just go to my main website. It's ourlifestylepodcast.com, which is the other podcast I do, but ROUR lifestylepodcast.com. That will get you to our main store. And on the little flyout menu, you can go to Lincoln Addict, and you will see that we have stickers there, and we have a couple of sticker kits for 64 Lincoln owners. But if you want to get you a sticker and support the cause, go out there and pick it up. I got 20% sale right now on those Lincoln Addict stickers. So thank you guys so much. Thank you to the ladies as well that listen. You guys take care. ODB, the Lincoln Addict. On to the next one. Hey, and as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we've got a special guest on, someone that I've had on the list a little while, Frank Sony. And Frank, man, how are you?
Dude, I'm doing great. Just sitting up here in the Pacific Northwest up in Victoria. It's fantastic weather today. It's nice, probably for you Americans down there. It's about 80 degrees, no breeze, perfect weather.
Man, dude, you're making me jealous. It's so humid down here in Florida right now. Of course, in the South, it's we're on polar opposites, if you will. I guess like you're for those that are listening. Basically, I'm in Florida, and Frank is, if you think about like where Vancouver's at, we'll talk a little bit about it. He's just south of there, kind of the visual that I have from Google Maps. So clear across the country, and then of course, obviously into Canada, but. Frank, dude, thank you so much for coming on. We see that you're super passionate about the Lincolns, and I'm going to try something a little bit different. Why don't you give out your Instagram now? That way, if someone's listening and they're kind of playing on their phone, hopefully they're not driving. But if they're playing on their phone, they can look you up, and then they can get a visual of your car as we start to get going here. So what's your Instagram name?
Yeah, so I started this Instagram page just in honor of my dad. He's still alive, but it's his car. So the handle is dad_64_continental.
Yeah, and it's DADS, and like you said, _64_continental. So thank you. So, as we kind of get going, I figured, why don't you tell the listeners, we got a great following. So thanks to all the listeners, as I mentioned earlier, that continue to tune in. A lot of people continue to nudge me and say, hey, we got to get more episodes. So we're trying to keep that path going. But why don't you give a little bit of information about who you are, Frank?
So, born and raised out here in the Pacific Northwest. Grew up here in Victoria ever since I was a little kid. My dad was always in the automotive industry, and he immigrated to Canada back in like the late 50s from Eastern Europe.
Wow. Okay.
And he never thought he'd get into cars the way that he did, but he just started working at car dealerships and fixed operations like parts departments. And he picked up this car pretty much when I was an infant, and it's just one of those things that's just been in the family. And he's taught me a lot. He taught me how to wrench on the car, and just once you get it in your blood, it just doesn't seem to go away.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. Now let me ask you this before we talk about the car. How awesome was it growing up in that area? Because again, we've got people from all over the world that listen. And with you being up there, when I look at Google Maps and I type in Victoria, Canada, it kind of looks like you're on, dare I say, a big island up there?
Yeah, dude, it's a huge island up here, and Victoria is like the state capital. So we've got a big Parliament building here, so a lot of the government heads are here. It's an old sort of English style city. We don't really have any skyscrapers, so you can see the ocean pretty much from anywhere you want to go. Like I said, there's no bridge connecting us to the mainland, so we're kind of isolated out here. A lot of people call it Fantasy Island because you kind of come here. We don't get a lot of snow. Like, it's really rare when we do get snow. The weather here is always nice and warm. We get passed over the rain a lot. The rain kind of passes over us. It kind of collects more on the lower mainland, the Olympic Mountains, the Rocky Mountains, the Pacific Mountains. So we just got great climate here. It is like Fantasy Island. Pretty chill.
Yeah, when you said 80 degrees earlier, right? I heard that right. You said 80. It's 80 degrees high today?
It's 80 degrees high today. It's going to be like that for the rest of this week.
Wow.
Tiny little bit of heat wave. I don't know if the jet stream's pushing up from California, but we're getting some nice weather right now. Some really nice weather.
Well, man, you sound like a meteorologist, and I'll take your word on that, because I'll tell you what, man, it is freaking warm down here. I grew up in Florida, so I'm accustomed to it. As I know John Cashman, big supporter of the podcast. He's one of the Lincoln OGs in this kind of small community of ours, and he lived here a long time now. He's over in Palm Springs, so hello, John. I'm sure he's on the road listening, so thanks, man, for always doing that. But, well, let me ask you this. So you kind of grow up in Canada. Your dad immigrates, as you mentioned, and he starts kind of wrenching on vehicles and stuff like that. At what age did you start maybe saying, hey, I want to get my hands dirty? Were you a teenager? Were you like, I don't want to mess with that? Like, what age did you kind of get hooked?
Well, dude, the funny thing is with like old school immigrant, parents, is it's always hands on. So your Saturdays weren't, necessarily going down to the arcade and playing video games, even though I love doing that. Weekends were like, hey, kiddo, here's your hammer, here's your wrench, get out here and help me with this stuff, right? So whether it was, putting an addition on the house, wiring a house, building something in the garden, or like I said, wrenching on cars. So it kind of was just something that was, raised in me to do. So as soon as, that opportunity when you're starting to drive or you see that window that you can drive, it was just like, yeah, you want to know everything. The cool thing with wrenching with my dad is he wasn't so much like, watch me do this. He was more like, well, you broke it. Let's see how you figure out how to fix it. So it was a lot of, he stood back, let me do trial and error to try and fix things. And, just became that passion to do things.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned how long he's had the car, give or take. Give us a little bit of backstory. Did he purchase it new? Was it maybe early 70s when these cars weren't as maybe sought after? How did he end up acquiring this 64 that we love, that we see all over your Instagram?
Yeah, so he kind of lucked into it. And I, the more I talked to him about it, it wasn't really his first choice to buy the car. So the way that it worked is an elderly couple had the car, and the gentleman, he had passed away, and the wife was afraid of driving the car. So they had bought it brand new, and I think I still got the bill of sale from when they bought it. And then he just, the car came into the dealership, and like you said, it was, like 1969, my mom was pregnant with me at the time, and, he said I needed a car, a family car, and he picked up this 1964 Continental. Dude, I think he paid like $500 for the car back then, and it became our family car. If you look on my Instagram page, you'll see a picture of me when I was a baby in the back seat of this thing. Like, it's been a family car since early 70s.
Oh, awesome. Man, he was cruising down the street in his 6'4" way before Eazy-E was. Isn't that right?
It's so true, so true. We drove this thing, to the province next to us, which is Alberta, which is like the next state. We drove this thing to Alberta a few times on the highway. Dude, I've got a scar on my eyebrow because I used to sit on the armrest in the front seat, no seatbelts. Dad used to smoke, ashtray open. He has to hit the brakes. Who goes into the ashtray? Me.
Well, those stories and those memories have, obviously been kind of just ingrained in your brain, it sounds like, Frank.
Right? Exactly.
The good old days, we call it.
That.
So, you talked a little bit about how he acquired the car, and did he drive it into, like, let's say the 80s, 90s, and then it started to sit because of, he just changed cars? Or kind of what's the story there on how it maybe transitioned into the garage and then over to your own, or over to your kind of curation, if you will, or, you being the curator now?
Yeah, so it was our daily driver until my mom, she got her license, and we picked her up in 1963 Ford Falcon Futura. Dude, deadly car.
Oh,
Learned
wow.
to drive on that car as well. Deadly. Little 6-cylinder in that. Just an awesome car. So we had two cars. They were both Fords. And then Dad started getting some demo vehicles, like, as part of his perk, they would give him a company car to drive. So this ended up sitting in the garage and became more of a weekend driver. Okay. And then as time went on, that weekend became a once-a-year kind of car. And then it just sat in the garage. And then the more that it sat in the garage, we always looked at it. I took it out every once in a while to like a buddy's wedding or something like that. But it wasn't getting driven enough. And you know how these cars are. When they sit a long time, things just start to, don't work the way that they used to.
Mm-hmm.
And so about 10 years ago, he literally just was like, not driving it anymore. He'd go in, start it up every once in a while. And it was I think it was like a Christmas dinner here at my house. I only live about 10 minutes away from them. We're all sitting around the dining room table, and he throws a set of like OG Lincoln keys, like the original key that's got the Lincoln emblem in it. He throws it on the table, and he said, "Son, I don't want it anymore. It's too much work. It's yours." I'm like, "Come on, Dad, you can't do that." He's like, "Nope, it's yours. I just hope that you'll do it right and bring her back to life." So I just made sure that he was cool with that, and took my time, and I brought it to a buddy of mine's shop and did a little bit of work on it, and got her back to life. And I still keep the car at their house in their garage, just so Dad can get a chance when he wakes up, if he wants to look outside and sees it in the garage, and he has these memories of what it was like, because it's always going to be, my dad's 64. So trying to keep that, legacy going.
Killer. I mean, who would have ever thought, your dad, oftentimes the old school, the dad would, throw the son maybe a little pocket knife, or, over the years kind of teaches, hey, let's get the BB gun out there, like the famous movie and all that, right? Christmas Story. But, he saw something in you that he wanted to pass on, that tradition of that car that you had those fond memories, and that had to just been an awesome feeling for you, man. You're never going to forget that, I'd imagine.
No, you know what I mean? And the thing is about the cars, like, the car, like I said, it's been in the family forever. And I always thought that, heaven forbid, something were to happen to my parents, you know what I mean? I would definitely grab the car and fix it up in honor of my parents. But, the gratitude that I have is epic because, I get to enjoy it with my dad now. Like, we go out almost every single Sunday. He rides shotgun. We stop. We have coffee. He tells the story of the car. He loves to wave at people. Like it gives him a new life to enjoy it. And it's like, yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better experience. Here's my dad who raised me in this car. I got to ride around in this car and have great memories. And now I get to be the pilot and I get to drive my dad around and have him create memories and tell me old stories. It's this full circle of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've got a daughter who's learning to drive now, and eventually, it'll be her car or her kid's car. Like, we'll keep this legacy going as long as we can. But the car is beautiful. Lincolns are amazing, but it's the story that's in this Lincoln that makes it that much bigger of a car.
Wow. Yeah, man, it gives me goosebumps thinking of just how well you said that. When you look at, we mentioned Dad's 6'4" Continental on Instagram. When you look at Frank's feed, you'll see there's obviously an awesome photo you shared back on June 21st with your daughter. You're in the front seat. She's kind of in the back. Real awesome moment there. And something that always stuck out to me, and one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is I could see the passion there. I see the connection. I had a great connection with my dad when we talked about cars and stuff, and he knew, even though he wasn't a, quote, Ford guy, he was more of a Chevy guy, he knew that I loved these Lincolns for whatever reason, and he always supported that, which I thought was cool. But a lot of the photos, it's almost like you kind of get a sneak photo, and you got your dad like in there. He's almost like, where's Waldo, right? But he's always right in there in many of the photos, and I think that's a very cool thing that you do, Frank.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. It's just, like I said, just creating those new memories. And, growing up, we didn't have all the social media stuff. And the cool thing is I get to share his story, not only with, this amazing Lincoln community that we have out there that is global, because there's people all over Europe that follow, all of us Lincoln owners. But, my family members that are all over the world too, they get to see, like you said, where's Waldo? Where's Dad? Some people call him Johnny Cash. He's like the little Johnny Cash with his like cool 60s retro glasses that he wears. And yeah, it's cool to share those things.
Yeah, he's got his hair combed back, and he's got his belt on a lot of the photos. You can see, he's the true definition of old school. Obviously came up as a hardworking guy, as you've kind of explained and laid the foundation of the story. And to me, that means a lot, because that generation, that's what they knew, putting their boots on, getting up, working hard, supporting the family. If they were lucky, they maybe have a nice little car like that they took real good care of. A lot of people did. And it's pretty awesome. Now, when we think of the car itself, let's talk a little bit about it. It's a 64, obviously, it ties into your Instagram name. The one thing I'll say is, knowing I got some of my notes here, keep me honest, it's a Princeton gray metallic sedan, of course, right?
It is, but that's not the original color.
Okay.
So Dad did have it painted. He had it painted in the 80s. He had it painted that gray. The original color, like if you look at the door jambs, is that blue silver that they had.
Yes.
I can't remember the exact the name of it, but it's that blue gray that they had.
Yeah, and it's funny because they had so many different colors. Mine, I'm pretty sure, is the Huron blue metallic, which I love. My dad and I love blue cars. I love the blue. There was a couple, like there was the silver blue metallic, there was a powder blue, there was a diamond blue. There were a couple. The cool thing is there was so many different options. I personally really like the Princeton gray color. It just kind of captures me. There's a local guy here I met, real nice guy. He ended up with a car. His is Princeton gray. And it's funny because another one of your fellow Canadians, Pat Tien, we've had him on. We're going to have him on again. He always, I think, has to do kind of a double take because you guys have almost the same color car.
We do. It's a total twin, and there's a couple of guys down in California that got the same twin as well too, with the red interior, because that's the other thing. I think Pat's car has got a blue interior, and
I think
like
so.
this bad boy's red everywhere. Red headliner that is still in mint condition from '64, never been taken down. Door panels still original. It's interesting because you see a lot of Lincolns have got the wood grain accessory on the door panels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this doesn't have it. This does not have those inserts.
Yeah, the 64, 65 interior is beautiful.
Yeah, and there's no air in this car. This car never came with air, so pretty basic trim level that way.
Well, hey, I mean, I know it's cliche, but you're up in Canada. You don't need air conditioning, man.
We don't need air conditioning up here. No, we don't.
You just roll those windows down. Yeah. So, obviously, one thing that I think the Lincoln community that we're trying to do a better job, and we've done, I'm not saying we're trying to, but I think there's been a convergence of the purists and some of the people that like the, customization aspect, right? So, you see a little bit less, what I call a little bit less hate out there when you post something. Sometimes people are like, hey, it's got the whites. I'm not a fan of those. Obviously, those are a quick change, right? For anybody that wants to just put it back to stock, right? How did your dad feel, right? So kind of walk us through a little bit and then maybe mention like what he thought of it. What are some of the things done to the car? It looks, from Instagram, it appears kind of like more of a stock, right? The interior looks amazing. But what are some of the things you've done to the 64 sedan? So
really, really, really basic stuff. So when I pulled it out of storage, it mechanically needed, the carburetor redone, transmission redone. I've always wanted to bag these cars because they do look absolutely fantastic bagged.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good opportunity for me because the lower ball joints on the lower control arms were completely just powdered out. So it was an easy swap to do that. Dad wasn't such a fan when I did that. He kind of, was a little bit bitter that he's like, oh, you're modifying it so much. So I'm like, Dad, it's a pretty easy swap to put it back.
Mm-hmm.
We're not really changing too much here. So I just bagged it, white walls, and that's it.
That's all you need on a car like this. You can really enjoy it. And even for the purists, I mean, I think many of us have gotten a Lincoln, and I'm sure like you, in the beginning you drive it and you go, man, this thing rides great. Even with some older shocks, and a lot of people have pointed out over the years in the forums and the Facebook groups, man, if you have a 50-year-old car and you just change the springs and you put new shocks on it, new leafs, if you will, in the back, obviously the rear springs, car's going to drive amazing and float down the road. Absolutely. But like with anything, we do, I mean, to me, a 60s Lincoln kind of lowered, even if it's static or if it's bagged, it just has this iconic look. And to the, you made a great point. And this goes out to everybody out there that's always like, man, these guys are, modifying, as you mentioned, the cars. They can always go back to stock. It takes a little bit of work. But to me, yours is classy. It's not overdone. It has a perfect mix of the originality and then mixed with some of the, modernization, maybe customizing, if you will. Yeah.
And like the bag kits, they really do make a big difference with ride. And to your point, it is really easy to swap it back. There's different kits that you can buy that are just bolt-ons. They bolt on to the factory, mounting points. You're not drilling, cutting, doing a bunch of things. If you just want to have a simple bag system to it, I recommend it. Like, I got to tell you, the ride that this thing compared to what it was like before. Yeah, the shocks were sacked. The leaf springs were sacked. You put 4 people in the car. The car used to bottom out all the time in the back end. You'd go to turn left. The car would dive right because it was just, there was no balance.
The sway
to it.
and all that. Yeah. All the bushings. I'm running
the Yeah, I'm running the AccuAir system with it, and it's got the E level on it. So you load it up with 4 or 5 people. The ride height's always the same. It's always adjusting it. It rides so great. Just it's air ride's the way to go on these cars.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Now, tell us a little bit about when you decided to do that. Did you embark upon installing it? Did you have a local shop? Are there customizers around there? How did you approach doing that work to the 64 sedan?
So Jay, it was an education, I tell you. There really isn't a lot of guys up here that do this kind of custom work. So I was on the internet. I think I contacted you. I was contacting, a ton of different people. I talked to Troy down at Born Customs down in Phoenix a little bit. A lot of the guys were just like, ship the car down here and we'll get her done. And with the Canadian dollar to the US dollar, shipping it, getting it down there, it was just not something that I was willing to do. Again, gratitude, and I just seem to have some kind of luck. I had a buddy of mine that owned a local shop here in town. He says, Frank, let me wrench on it with you. He says, bring it down here. I'll throw you the keys to the shop. You can come down here, work on it at night. You've got free use of the hoist and whatever have you. So it was a 4-month project. I let them do the heavy lifting of changing the control arms and making sure the front end was done right. And, we just wrenched on it at night, and I learned a lot. Okay, I got to tell you, I learned a lot about these cars.
It's fun, isn't it? Especially when you got a buddy or a local shop. I mean, you get out of work that day, you go wrench on it, you got it up on the lift, however you're doing the work. And it's just a good feeling because a lot of us, as we get to a certain age, I've been in the truck scene a long time, so I've been around their suspension and around, going to, numerous shows a year. But a lot of folks, and even me, now that I'm getting into my 40s, where, you kind of get up, you go to work, you come home, repeat, rinse, repeat. Well, when you can kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like you kind of inject this awesome project, right? And you get excited and, that it's already running and driving. So now you're just going to customize it some and then cruise it on the boulevard. It definitely can kind of get the hair standing on your arms. And I think that's pretty cool. Now, if you remember, what kit did you end up buying a certain kit, or what did you do with that? I know you mentioned AccuAir, which for all the listeners, many of them know that's the air management, kind of the up and down part, right? That's going to manage the air, the compressors, all that. But what other stuff did you maybe use? Did you end up buying a kit?
I did end up buying a kit. I actually went with the RideTech system.
Yep.
So I'm 80% happy with it. The front end with the strong arms, the bags, the shocks, the way that front end goes together, the front end is fantastic. My ego does have a little bit of a challenge that I can't get the ass end on the ground with that RideTech system, but, it is what it is. I wanted something that was a little bit more bolt-on, keeping it sort of stock, and instead of doing a Devious custom rear end, which is the way to go. They have great 4-links, that just bring these things right on the ground. So it's got a RideTech front to back and the AccuAir CVT. So it's the one with the valves in the tank and then dual compressors. So I just got 1 tank, 2 compressors. I love that AccuAir system. It really breaks my heart that those guys have gone out of business, but they made some great products.
Yeah, that was big news earlier this year and was unfortunate. Hopefully we'll kind of see some resurgence there. There's a couple other big players out there. But, to your point, in my 67, which has kind of been a long-term project, never really got it to a point of running and driving, but it has those same front lower control arms because for years and years, there was Mob Steel, and then Mob Steel would kind of partner with Air Ride, right? And, you'd end up with those RideTech lowers and that type of thing. And then, of course, as these cars grew in popularity and more guys wanted to lay them out, you ended up with people, as you guys hear, Devious Customs, a big sponsor of this podcast. But I almost appreciate the fact that some people forget that when you go and you do this kind of work to a car, like for me, I'm kind of OCD, and I end up, it'll take me 5 years to finish something, right? Whereas what you did was you said, hey, I want to do it. You order the parts, you get with the homie, you get it done, and your car looks fantastic. You're out there enjoying it. And then let's say a year or two goes by and you go, you know what? I want to ratchet it up to the next level. You just go and do it. You cut the tunnel a little bit in the back. You do those little bit of mods. But to me, you kind of did it the right way. You got it out there, right? Kind of in the business I used to be in, we would call it minimum viable product. Get it out there at least, enjoying it, and then you can always improve it month over month, year over year, however you so choose. You know what I mean?
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
Good point. Good point. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So the tires, any idea what tires you have? And obviously you got, it looks like the wide white on it.
Yeah, I did just the stock 15-inch wide whites there. There was a supplier out of Vancouver, which is a ferry boat away. They had a set of Coker white walls out there, and you know what? They're really, really reasonable for the weather up here. They work great, easy to clean. Dad still had like sort of the OG thinner white walled tires that were on there. They were just whatever heavy. So it was such an easy swap with the white walls. And in my opinion, it just makes the car pop with the chrome, with the lines of it. It just makes the car seem just even bigger than life with those white walls on it.
It absolutely does. And obviously there's, some guys are like, oh, I like the smaller, almost like maybe it was a little over an inch, that white wall, kind of more the stock. But to me, like I said, when someone owns a car, I preach this a long time, it's your car. You can customize it as you want. And I know a lot of the old school guys and the purists are kind of like, well, these cars were really nice from the jump. Well, yeah, if you walked up to your car at a show, a lot of guys are going to be like, oh, he's got it lowered a little bit. And you look inside it and you go, man, this is like a time capsule with that awesome.
Yeah.
I forget if the interior was called Fiesta Red, but I know the outside the red was called Fiesta. Like that interior is the same that Tony Boss Bolin has in his 65. And just to me, the color of the car, the white walls, the little bit of the lowered stance, obviously on the airbag system, and then the red interior, just make it, man, just, dude, cherry, bro.
Thank you. And to your point, Jay, it's like, it's easy to swap it back. Buy a set of tires with the freaking pinner whites on it. You just put it back to regular stock height and away you go. So she's still got the OG motor in this thing. And I had a lesson the other day when I popped a brake line on the front end. That's one other modification that's coming down the pipe is I will go with the dual reservoir master cylinder on this thing, because when that hose blew, I tell you, it was a white knuckle moment.
Well, I'm glad that you brought it up. I did want to talk about kind of the motor and some of the mechanics of it. I can't preach this enough. Met a guy a few years ago, Tony and I, we went down to the LCOC event here in Florida. I think it was April of 2018, if I remember correctly, down in the Bradenton area. And met this guy that had driven his, I want to say 63. It was either 62 or 63. He had driven it to like 40 states in the U.S. I mean, just a hardcore guy, really nice guy. And his was like a 99-point inspection type car. And Tony and I look and we're like, man, he's got the single master. To me, even though, some guys, the purists are like, no, I want to have it just like this. I mean, even John Cashman and Blair Farmer and Teresa down here, they will tell you, listen, don't worry about the points. Safety is more important. So what happened? I mean, were you just literally like, man, you just lost brakes?
Oh, Jay, I tell you, man, again, more gratitude of how lucky I've been with so many things. Dad and I have driven, half an hour drives on the highway. We've gone hours and hours driving this thing. It's been, like I said, 3.5 years driving it, having to brake pretty hard. Everything's working good. We're out for coffee one Sunday. We're just kind of cruising around. It was a hot day, another probably 80-degree weather. I was just found a parking stall, and I was just pulling in there, and the pedal literally right to the floor as I was parking. Like, e-brake on right away, and I'm like, wow, I just lost pedal. Dad's like looking at me going, I don't know what to say. We popped the hood, the reservoir was down about half, and I'm like, maybe she was just a little bit low. Put some more fluid in there, pedal right down. So I could just see where it was coming out of that front hose. And again, these are things that, you know, when I had it up on the hoist, we checked it, everything was good. Not thinking that I might as well just change every hose. You know, Jace, to your point, it's like, you know, you're getting the car out, you're driving it, you're enjoying it. You know what I mean? I'm not about to pull the motor just because I want to make sure everything is good on it, right? The hoses looked great, but sure enough, one went, and when one goes on these cars, you got no brakes, nothing.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I had this little saying in life, like live with no brakes, right? Like, you know, hustle hard, you know, 0 to 100, you know, all that stuff, right? And I mean that in the hustle form. But when we're talking about cars, we need some brakes, man. We got to have brakes. And what happened on my 64 when I got it, you know, it kind of starts to snowball, and it got to the point where something had happened where mine were really bad, and I ended up a couple of the guys in the Lincoln forum. So I always recommend to people lincolnforum.net, or it's the lincolnforum.net, just how it sounds. They had referred me. They go, man, I think Classic Tube sells the full kit, and I looked it up, and they had it for like the 65, and I knew the 65s are almost identical to 64. So I was able to make that kit work, and I had redone mine. But to your point, it's even if you redo all your brake lines, then maybe your master goes out. Well, then that's a whole nother thing. So, you know, just to keep it simple for everyone, a dual master is kind of when you take that little cover off. You know, a lot of us and you growing up and stuff, you see the dual. You know, there's the two little sections, right? And then, you know, you have your brake fluid in there. Well, these older cars, like the 64 Lincoln, it had a single master. So if that went out, then you basically have no brakes.
Yeah, and Jay, you think about it, these cars are massive, and they take a lot of room to stop even when you have brakes, right? Like, you know, a Classic like this, having an accident, you know, because you blew a brake hose is just, it's just a nightmare waiting to happen. Yep. So thankfully I was just parking, but I do have a buddy that found me pretty much a bolt-on dual reservoir master cylinder, because I guess the line and the pressure has to be a certain way unless you want to use an adapter to regulate front to back. But that's the next big project that's going to happen on this bad boy.
Yeah, kind of like the metering valve that you kind of put in there, and exactly, yeah. And you know, a lot of folks will, you know, feel like they got to go and upgrade and do. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, you could spend some money going with bigger brake kits and all that stuff. I mean, believe me, there's a lot of cool bolt-on stuff out there. Tony, got to give him a lot of credit. He helped me redo the entire brake system on my 64. Now, I did most of the lines, I think, myself. He helped me because I'll be honest, when I learned how to do brakes when I was younger, I pretty much never had to mess with the drum brakes, right? I would see them, and I'm like, man, that's over my head, right? And it's really not that hard, but you got to learn, right, with the springs and stuff. So, but whatever we did, he dialed mine in. I mean, it took us a while. We changed the booster. Of course, we got the dual master, all new brake lines, the hoses and the lines themselves. But my car stops pretty good now. I haven't, knock on wood, I haven't been in a situation to like, oh my God, we're going to go off a cliff. Let's lock them up. I mean, then it's going to get a little scary, I would think. But yeah, you know, you got to have good brakes, man, because especially like you get out and drive the car, so you know you don't want to have any challenges.
No, and I think the next project, you know, I think you referred me to Pat, and I had a great chat with him, is converting this old amp meter to a voltmeter. You know, Pat had some great descriptions on how to swap these things out, buying the right aftermarket, you know, voltmeter that really just retrofits into these things perfectly. So that's, after I do the brakes, that's my next big project, is to convert this amp meter to voltmeter.
Yeah, and definitely get with Pat. You know, hopefully being a fellow Canadian, he'll help you out. I kind of he tried to walk me through it, and I'm not as good, to be honest, doing some of those little things. But he had a cool way to take a boat gauge, basically, and use the guts of it to make it from the, am I saying this right, the amp meter, the amp gauge, amp meter into the voltmeter. So it actually, you can't even tell. It looks totally factory. So he's got a cool thing he does there. You know what I mean? Yeah, so good stuff.
And that
there.
way it keeps the dash all stock and everything looks good, and then your gauges work and so on and so forth. So just trying to keep this as like clean as possible.
Yeah, and we've said it before, public service announcement to anyone out there that has a 6465, you have kind of three options. You can either have the gauge rebuilt, you can send it to someone like Blair Farmer, you can message me, Lincoln Addict podcast at gmail.com. I'll get you Blair's information. Now, it is a little bit of a beast to take it out. You can mail it. You can bypass it, where you basically disconnect it. You hook the two wires together, and you can solder. I mean, you could butt connect them, but I soldered mine with my buddy Paul. Soldered it, or you can go with like Dakota Digital gauges, but then you of course are losing that stock look. So, but that's important because all of that power that's coming off the battery, that's coming in your main power wire, I want to say it's maybe an 8 gauge. All that power comes in and goes through that gauge, and over time it kind of wears out, and it can spark, or it can ground out, and it can cause a fire. So we just like to remind people about that. That's what's been reinforced to me, so I try to kind of pass on the message. But good
very
stuff.
true.
So you're out driving the car. I think you've been able to. Your parents obviously enjoy it a little bit. Your kids enjoy it. Where are some of the places that you cruise to? Do you kind of stay within a vicinity, or do you sometimes venture out further?
Pretty much you just stay within the greater vicinity of the city. We have some suburbs that I will cruise out to that are, half an hour, 45 minutes sort of out of the main core of the city. But right now, it's a lot of city cruising. Tonight there's a little meet at a local coffee shop. They're shooting the local news there, so there'll be a bunch of cars there. I'll just roll by, have a coffee, bag her out, and just chill. It's all about low and slow in the city.
Yeah, that's slab sometimes is slang for slow, low, and banging,
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Because of where you live on that, big island, are there other customized cars, or is it like if you go to this little thing tonight, do you just have people swarm over? Are they just like, wow?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a big car culture here in Victoria. Basically, with the weather, the economics, just the people that live here. There's a lot of retired people that live here, and they've got a lot of hot rods. Every 4 years, we host Deuce Days. So it's the largest collection of 32 Fords in North America. They arrive here, and it's like a week-long event. It's epic. We have a huge car culture here. So, like tonight, for instance, at the coffee shop that's shooting the weather, I'm predicting 75 to 125 cars.
Damn.
Yeah, it'll be a good turnout. And as far as Lincolns, there's 4 64s in the city that I know of, and I think there's only myself and Brad are the only ones that have got ours on the road. So Brad, he's got a pretty sweet 64 that he cruises around in too. So
yeah, now I'm trying to think, is Brad which Brad are we talking about? Are we talking about is he one on Instagram?
Yeah, Brad McKinnon. So
yeah. RA Brad.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he's got a pretty sweet little 64 that he cruises around in.
Yeah, it's RA_Brad. Really, really good dude. Love his car. Obviously, it's laid out, white walls, looks awesome. Kind of been following his build through the Lincoln Addict account.
Yeah.
Good dude. Well, you got a little bit better of a ratio than Tony and I. We were talking earlier, and we're going to do our 3rd annual Tampa Kennedy cruise. Basically, we try to do it the weekend of when he originally was here in 63 before his fateful trip to Dallas. And Tony knows of about 20 cars within the greater Tampa Bay area. Some older guys, and believe it or not, man, this is something I got to give you credit for, but with these guys, they basically go, nah, I really don't want to take my car out, or haven't got 3-4 years they haven't gotten around to doing much. And I know, like, obviously everybody's in a different place in their life, but the thing I've got to tip my cap to you, Frank, is you get out there, you cruise your car, whether it's just you and your family or maybe a homie that meets up, and you guys go and enjoy it. As much as like sometimes I don't have a lot of time to maybe go cruise, if I do get in the car and crank it up and drive it around, it just brings a smile to your face.
It does, and everybody's entitled to why they don't want to drive it. They want to save it. They want to save it for special occasion. But I don't know, man. These cars are meant to be driven. Any classic's meant to be driven, and you know what I mean. You spend all that money, time investing in these cars. Drive it.
Oh yeah.
Drive it to the coffee shop. Get out. Go for a beer. Like just drive them.
Yeah, there's an old saying. Yeah, there's an old saying that when the cars were named the Continental, some people, and this is probably just one of those stories that's been passed on, but they wanted to be able to say, hey, drive it from one end of the continent to the other. And, with the guy, like I said, from the LCOC, like, kudos to him. I mean, he drives his sedan with his wife all over the country. And he ran into, I forget what it was, he had told me he ran into a challenge. And, some people were like, well, what do you do if you break down or whatever? And he had kind of broke down. He had an issue. And he wasn't too far from Lincoln Land because he was in Florida by then. And he's like, man, just bought a part and fixed it. That's the old school way. And sometimes even me, I'll be totally honest, I almost forget that because I always said I wanted to be able to build my car that if I want to drive to Orlando or St. Cloud or, even Miami, a 4-hour drive, having the confidence to be able to get in, do all the right maintenance and drive down without having to feel like I got to put it on a trailer. You know what I mean? Because it's like you said, they're made to be driven.
They really are. You know what I mean? And like, Roberto down at the guy with the ratties down in California.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, I watch those guys. They just cruise all the time, and it's just like it's such an inspiration. And it's just great to see these guys, rolling in their cars.
Yeah, 1,000%. And we got to give a lot of credit to those guys because even Tony and I talk about it. No matter which way you slice or dice it, there's some purists. There's the John Cashmans. Jim Ayers and some of those guys, they all participate, and there's probably no bigger group of Lincolns, at least in my opinion, that are getting together. I know Texas goes pretty hard in the paint, but out there, man, those videos are putting together with the drone footage and some of the edits they do, just amazing, and it's cool that we recently had them on, so everybody go on Instagram and type in the Ratties, Rattys, very good people, man.
Very good. Yeah, very, very good people. Yeah, it's my goal, Jay, is to, one day just, grab the family and just take my time and cruise down to California and hook up with those guys down there.
Maybe hit some, PCH, Pacific Coast Highway?
Yep, do that old low and slow highway, just take my time. Yeah, right along the water.
Yeah, man, just a little bit of luggage in that big old trunk of yours and just, maybe put some Johnny Cash on or something, man, and just roll. Exactly.
Well,
I got a chance to visit Astoria last July, the very end of July. I went up there for a truck show, and before we started recording, I had mentioned to you that I kind of went on that adventure myself, flew up there, drove a rental over to Astoria, had never been to that area of at least the U.S., and it's just, man, so beautiful. So I tell people, man, if you got dreams or there's things you want to do, we're not getting any younger, set those goals, whether it be this year, next year, 5 years, and you guys can attain those, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So good stuff. Yep. Is there anything else that you have kind of planned for the car other than enjoy it? You kind of mentioned maybe a couple little upgrades here and there, but anything else that we might be missing that you wanted to hit on? Yeah,
so besides the upgrades, expensive to paint cars up here, especially these classic cars. So, she's got a little bubble on one quarter panel, which is pretty common for these cars. Other than that, she's, no accent. She's straight as an arrow. But I would love to, I'd love to paint her back to the original, sort of blue gray that it used to be. And, it's just cosmetic stuff that's just going to take time to do and find the right shop to get her painted.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I tell you, until then, you're going to have a lot of fun. It looks like a great cruiser. Got the family in there as well, enjoying it. And why don't you want to give any shout-outs to your daughter, your dad, anyone else, while you're here, man?
Well, obviously it's gonna, go without saying, I'm really lucky that Dad kept his car, and I'm super happy that we get that time, just him and I, just to go cruising. As you know, today we were talking. I took Mom out for a little cruise. She's not so much into the old classic car, but every once in a while she likes to get out for a bit. Grateful my daughter's interested in this thing, yeah. And I'm really, really, I give a huge shout out to this Lincoln community. I wish I knew you guys before I started to restore this car, because, the information you guys share, the family, it's a true family, this Lincoln community. And, if you guys have got a Lincoln you want to restore, you got a Lincoln, you got questions, don't ever hesitate. Just reach out, contact anybody who's on Instagram or any of these forums that Jay's got up. It's a great community we got.
It is, and I've learned a lot. Luckily, locally we're kind of in this great area in outside of Clearwater, but you've got Lincoln Land Inc., great people, Chris Dunn and his organization. You got Blair Farmer, a wonderful mechanic. You have Old Lincoln Parts here as well. So we kind of got the Bermuda Triangle, the LincolnForum.net, kind of something that, as John Lyman said prior, kind of the LCOC's main kind of hub in terms of sharing content and stuff. Obviously, forums have somewhat dived off a little bit just because, with Facebook, there's a lot of people. There's a Suicide Slabs. There's a couple Lincoln groups. Of course, our Lincoln Addict group as well. But it's a big community. I know Nathan Wilson's doing a lot on YouTube, and we're all trying to kind of just help each other out as much as we can. So thanks for saying that. But Frank, dude, it's been awesome kind of link it up with you to talk a little bit about where you're from, maybe where you're going with the 64. And, man, was there anything else you wanted to share? Any shout-outs you wanted to give?
No, I'm good. Big shout out to you, Jay. Thanks for your support, and thanks for having me on the show today.
Yeah, no problem. And to your dad, your mom, your wife, your daughter, dude, you guys just stay on the rise and just keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thank you. Yeah, stay tuned for more posts as we go for a cruise tonight.
Yeah, man, I can't wait to see the photos, and we'll be sharing this pretty soon. So, thanks again, Frank Sony from Victoria, Canada, up in that area. So check it out on Google Maps if you want to get a visual, and stay on the rise, my friend.
Thanks, brother.